Hello, everyone. So I want to do a bit of a summary of my trip to Korea, which I had coupled with my Vietnam trip, and give you a bit of some of my thoughts on the trip. So a bit of background. At the time of recording this video, it is the fall of 2022. So we're kind of in a endemic pandemic stage, and I have been to Korea before, so that gives me sort of different perspective and familiarity, and I also know people there and speak a little bit of the language, even though it is a complicated language. So so let's get into it. So Korea, overall, my trip was amazing. Again, I'm a little biased about that place because I do have some friends and contacts there, and I've been there before, and obviously really like it. And so the question is, why do I like it? Because it is, along with Japan, one of the very very developed places in Asia. Yet gives you a different experience from Western experience. So you have a lot of the first world comforts, and sometimes even better than what I am used to in Toronto, Canada, in terms of having a better transportation system, everything being open, very late night, and yet still having a bit of quite the foreign experience, because it is a place that is different from the Western world. Now, the question people might ask, particularly if you're thinking about traveling there and we're still in a pandemic, is it worth it with all the the regulations? So I won't lie, it was a bit of a worry with all the sort of testing that I'd have to do. So I had to take a test before getting on a plane, and a PCR test the next day on arrival, and of course I had to get also a visa now done, which before I didn't have to do that before the pandemic. So there was obviously some worry that what happens if if the tests come back and there's a problem and things like that. But everything was clear, so that was great. And in terms of restrictions, at the time I think most things were pretty much open, free. They still had an indoor mask mandate, so people would wear masks indoors, and outdoors there was no mandate anymore. A lot of people would wear their masks outdoors. I like to breathe fresh air, so I would remove it outside, and of course I'd respectfully follow the rules when indoors. And but yeah, I noticed that a lot of people, depending on where you go, a lot of people tend to wear masks indoors, because that's one of the things I like about Korea, is that there's a social consciousness and respect, which sometimes maybe it's too much, that people get sort of caught up in the image of what other people think and what is the perception. But it is there, right? It is nice. Now, one thing about Korea, though, I think people need to understand, is that it is very different from the Western world. And if you study their history and culture, they've had a tough history, so they've had to make more effort to preserve their culture. So if you don't know the language, I mean, you can certainly get around like a big city like Seoul, right, where say the younger generation speak English, but some people are not comfortable with it. But knowing Korean definitely gets you a better, deeper experience, which is not something you can really crash course if you speak no Korean whatsoever, because again, it's a hard language. It's not like speaking Spanish, which is somewhat related to English with a Roman base. So learning the pronunciations and learning how to say things right and hear things right, all that takes a lot of time. That takes years. So that's a bit of a difficult ask. Having said that, a lot of Koreans definitely make the definitely appreciate when you make the effort to learn. So that just says a lot, because You don't have to be perfect, but they definitely, you know, yeah, if you're in a foreign country, realizing that's the language that they speak, and not having this sort of expectation that a lot of Westerns have, which can be a little bit borderline arrogant, expecting that everyone wants to speak English, even if they can, right? So, your level of experience that you have in Korea, I think, is really dependent on knowing Korean, right? And again, you can get around with it. Like if you go to Seoul, for instance, there's an area called Itaewon, which is sort of the foreign district, and there to be able to do a lot of things. But maybe areas like Gangnam, for instance, a little bit more difficult because it's not a foreign district, right? So why do I love Korea other than the sort of first world experience? Again, it is a better infrastructure at times than Canada, but you also have other things there, like things are open late night. So if you definitely like nightlife, I think nightlife in Korea is a lot better than Canada because things are open a lot later, where Canada, everything has to, Toronto, you have to close up at 2 a.m. In terms of the subway system, it puts Toronto to shame. You, for the most part, don't need a car to get around, and even going to smaller towns in Korea, I find the infrastructure sometimes better than Toronto as a big city, right? So all those type of things really make for a good experience. Weather, depending on what time of year, can be a bit of a challenge. Most of Asia gets pretty humid, so if you go into, like, say, August, or in the thick of summer, it can get pretty humid and get pretty intense. Around September it cools down a little bit, and of course it is cold during the winter. The weather patterns are a little bit similar, at least Seoul is a little bit similar to Toronto, where Toronto there's more up and down. So I'm used to this sort of diversity in weather and experience with that. And if you go, say, during spring, there could be a little bit more air pollution that happens that comes from some of the industrialization coming from China. A lot of people, even before the pandemic, would wear masks, right? So definitely also what time of year you choose can make a huge difference in your experience, right? And for me, that's a non-issue because, like I said, I'm used to the different variances in Toronto. We have 4 different seasons. But I think the biggest thing is definitely that familiarity with Korean. Sometimes, again, people might think that Korean people are being cold if they say ask for directions and things like that, and they're just not comfortable in answering English. And also knowing just like little cultural things, like speaking to someone off the street in Western culture is not a big deal, but even amongst other Koreans, that's not a thing that they do, right? It's actually kind of looked down upon in terms of talking to strangers, right? And then a lot of Westerns will think, oh, they're being really rude, or no, it's again a different cultural bias, also comfort with language and all those other things, right? So like most things, you have to go travel, take off your blinders and remove your biases. But what makes it difficult is these are things that sometimes people don't always speak about to articulate what are the differences, right? And also a lot of people tend to generalize all Asian cultures in one slop, comparing, say, Korea to Thailand, which is it's a totally different culture, by far, right? So I can't answer those things for you. Again, I don't know where you're at in your understanding, but I would have to say that there's a level of depth that of understanding things that even for me, studying the culture, I don't always understand, right? And that takes years, right? But in terms of the complications with the pandemic and stuff like that. Yeah, that might be something you want to weigh out. Yeah, if you want to go, and if that slows you down. They're saying, I think the spring of 2023, the mask mandate might be done for indoors and things like that. So maybe it's worth it for you to wait then, or maybe you're watching this afterwards and that's a non-issue. But overall, it's a gorgeous country, very clean. A great infrastructure and culture and things like that. It is more expensive than other places in Asia. Again, you get what you pay for, so that to me is just basic logic. But it's not going to be usually that cheap trip compared to, say, Thailand or Vietnam. So yeah, I don't know what your reasons are, but those are some of my thoughts on my trip, and I hope some of those things helped you in making a decision. All right, see you